Good evening. It is my pleasure to welcome you tonight to learn more about one of the most troubling periods in modern history through the eyes of a woman who lived it and truly helped shape its outcome. I could call this a sellout crowd, except two facts. One, there was nothing to sell. Thanks to our sponsors who are listed on the back of your program, this event was free. Let's give them a hand. And two, no one needed to sell a program with someone like Marthe at its center. It's such a beautiful venue envisioned by Tamar and Milton Maltz, who are watching with us tonight. It took some time to get a date for tonight's event, quite a few years actually. And when we did, we were amazed at its significance. At Chabad, we are into coincidences and their meaning. Today is September 18. Aha, I can hear you thinking, 18, of course, symbolizing Chai, life. It is not just the 18th of September, though. It is also the 18th day of the Hebrew month of Elul, making this a double measure of life. How apropos that in a few minutes we will hear the story of a woman who put her own life on the line to help save many others. Personally, for me, I cannot wait to hear this story. I was born and raised in Vienna, Austria, surrounded by many individuals who survived our people's darkest hour. The 18th of Elul carries another personal significance to me, as it marks the birth of two historic Jewish leaders. The 17th century was a harrowing time for Eastern European Jews, plagued by Cossacks and murderous pogroms. And amid this chaos, on this day of the 18th of Elul, a Jewish baby was born who would grow up to leave an everlasting imprint on his people. Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, or the Besht as he was known, was the founder of the Hasidic movement, imbuing countless of Jewish communities, downtrodden Jewish communities, with hope, purpose, and even joy, introducing the then new concept that in God's eyes, every Jew, every human being is equally loved, no matter who they are, what they are, where they're from, their affiliation or lack thereof. Incredibly, 47 years later, on the very same day of the 18th of Elul, another baby was born. His name was Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, and he was the founder of the Chabad branch of the Hasidic movement, taking the teachings of the Beshts, adding a philosophical and an intellectual twist, and spreading it far and wide so that its efforts still resonate this evening. His latest successor was the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson of blessed memory, who was the leader of worldwide Chabad movement, who took their message to all four corners of the globe through his educational initiatives and his countless Chabad emissaries, our colleagues across the world, with 18 centers in the greater Cleveland area alone. We are so proud, my husband and I, to be the Rebbe's representatives here leading Chabad at Case Western Reserve University and University Circle. We don't undertake this mission alone, and so I wanted to give a big shout out to our board sitting there in the back, to our Chabad student board, who are putting in countless time and effort. We are also so blessed. Thank you. We are so blessed by hundreds of supporters, many of them are here as well, who are giving the gift of life to hundreds of Jewish students each year. I would like to call upon one of those leaders, Dr. Daniel Simon, president of University Hospitals Medical Centers, who together with his wife Marcy is a dear friend and a true partner with Chabad at Case Western Reserve University. Dr. Simon, we are honored by your presence tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebitz and Sarah. It's really an honor and a privilege to share the stage tonight with a hero and Holocaust survivor like Marthe. She teaches us how everyone can make a difference if you just step up to the plate. I can't wait to hear her story. I would also like to thank all of you for coming this evening. We are in a magnificent venue, and in many ways, this is the coming out party for Chabad, CWRU, and University Circle with this magnificent crowd this evening. Many of you may not know, but we have two incredible jewels among us in Mendy and Sarah. And as many of you know, it's always interesting how you learn and meet these people. And it was only about 3 years ago that I had the very common traditional knock on the door that many of you know about, when Rabbi Oleski knocked on my door, peered into my office and said, "Did you put on tefillin today?" And I said no, and he came in, and that was the start of a very special friendship with Mendy and Sarah. I'm fortunate to study with him twice a week. We eat many nice meals together, and we've had amazing experiences at their home. Their home is a very special place. It's open without any expectations. It's a safe place for people to explore, knowing who they are, that they are loved and accepted for their inherent value. It's in fact pure Ahavat Yisrael. They care deeply about every student. I can't tell you the countless times that the rabbi calls me and says, "Dan, I need an appointment for this student. Someone's in the emergency room. A parent's calling me. Please come and help." I just want you to know how proud my wife, Dr. Marcy Schwartz, and I are to provide the lead gift for the new Chabad Center that will be very soon coming to life in University Circle. And now it is with really great pride that I call on one very special CWRU graduate, Sarah Gleiberman, who will share with us tonight why she is here, and who will also have the honor of introducing Marthe Cohn on behalf of the student community. Sarah.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah Gleiberman, and it is my absolute honor to be here tonight to introduce Marthe Cohn. I graduated from Case Western Reserve University in 2018. I am so grateful to Sarah and Rabbi Mendy Olevsky for asking me to be here for this special event. The Olevskys and Chabad enriched my college experience immeasurably, and thanks to them, I always had a place to celebrate my Judaism and be among friends and family. During my time at Case Western Reserve University, I was incredibly involved with Chabad on campus and served as the student board president for 2 years. Because of Chabad, I was able to take part in countless life-changing Jewish opportunities, such as various trips to Israel, like Birthright and Onward Israel Links, the Sinai Scholars Program, the National JLI Retreat, and the Maya Note Women's Program. But perhaps the most profound and life-changing was the trip to Poland through Chabad's Living Links program. Last December, over the course of 6 immersive and powerful days, I, along with 40 other college-age students and an amazing staff, toured through various cities in Poland to learn about and experience the devastating stories of our ancestors during the Holocaust. Throughout the trip, I was so moved by the power of our collective spirit as Jewish brothers and sisters. Despite where we stood in that cold, gray landscape to hear testimonies and mourn the tragedies of our people, we entered those places with tears and devastation in our hearts, but left each one ringing with song and bursting with light. Inspired by our ancestors who not for a minute forgot who they were, we carried the torch for the millions that were brutally taken from the physical world, and we embodied their legacy. I would like to share a brief passage from a journal entry I wrote after visiting the mass grave of 800 children in the forest of Zbylatowska Góra in Poland. The children. I will never not think of those children. I sobbed the majority of the time, especially as I clutched the cold blue poles surrounding the grave. I wept so many tears for those beautiful, innocent lives taken for no reason. I felt the love and immense sorrow of their parents who also died or bravely gave them up in hopes they might survive. I knelt nearer to the children so they knew I was there to celebrate their lives in mine and be as close as I possibly could to reach their souls. The rabbi sang Avinu Malkeinu, and I wept. I will not forget those children. I truly want to vow to celebrate their lives and live on as their legacy. I want to raise Jewish children to be proud, strong, resilient Jews for many reasons, but for one, in honor of the ones that did not get to live out their potential and share their beauty with the world. I must always continue to fight for the Jewish people and defend them, always be proud, and always give, support, educate, and love. So now, in addition to the countless we lost, it is the experiences, testimonies, and legacies of survivors that inspire me, and I'm sure all of you. We know that we must not only hear their stories, but embrace them and use them as a springboard to continue to educate ourselves and others, and to dedicate ourselves to fighting prejudice and injustice. I never felt prouder to be a Jew than when I came back from my trip to Poland. It is stories like Marthe's that empower me to be a voice for my people and anyone else who may face adversity. On behalf of Chabad, it is my absolute honor and privilege to introduce you to a woman who embodies the true meaning of bravery, a living legacy and example of resilience and courage. Please join me in welcoming Mrs. Marthe Cohn.
First, I wish to thank Rabbi Alevsky and Mrs. Alevsky for having invited me to this event. And I want to thank all the staff at Case Western Reserve to have invited me too. And I want to thank all of you who have come so numerous to listen to my journey during World War II. We will show you a DVD. In 2004, Mr. Richard Trenk, the movie director of the Wiesenthal Center, a museum of tolerance, that museum has 2 names, came to my home and interviewed me for 5 hours. But be reassured, the DVD will last only 10 minutes. And the DVD was made not by Mr. Richard Trenk, but by somebody else in the Wiesenthal Center after my comments. Once you have viewed the DVD, you will understand why I tell you that. So that DVD was made by somebody else at the Wiesenthal Center and was shown in 2004 at a big bash in a hotel in Beverly Hills in Los Angeles where we live. Here is a DVD.
How does a young girl from a devoutly Orthodox Jewish family end up becoming a spy whose efforts helped to bring an earlier end to the war in Europe in 1945? The answer to that question was one that Marthe Cohn, born Marthe Hoffnung, kept to herself for the better part of a half-century. Born in 1920 in the French town of Metz in the Alsace region of France near the German border, Marthe was one of 7 children. The family was quite religious, but at the same time mixed easily with their non-Jewish neighbors. But with war clouds on the horizon in September of 1939, the Hoffnungs and many of their Jewish neighbors decided to move to a safer part of France, away from the German border, to the town of Poitiers, southwest of Paris. However, they were not safe for long. The The Nazis invaded France, and with little resistance, the French government capitulated. Immediately, life began to change.
We didn't know how bad it would be. We could not understand that, because even if we knew about Kristallnacht, it was in Germany, they did that to the Germans, they couldn't do that to the French people.
For a while, in spite of the various restrictions placed on the Jews, the Hoffnungs were able to go about their daily business. Martha started nursing school and became engaged to a young medical student. As the war progressed, and resistance to the Nazis and their Vichy French collaborators became more widespread, the family began to take more chances. Martha and her sisters hid Jews who did not have the proper papers, and her fiancé became actively involved in resistance activities. One day, French police arrested her sister Stephanie, and then her father. When her father was released shortly thereafter, the family managed to escape using false papers that did not identify them as Jews. There was a plan to help Stephanie escape from the French jail she was being held at, but sadly, it failed.
She was caught in the camp, and then later she was transferred to Drancy near Paris, and then to Pithiviers. And she wrote that they were going to be deported that afternoon of Yom Kippur 42.
Most of the Hoffnung family went to the mountains to join an older brother who was head of the resistance there. Martha finished her nursing studies in Marseille, occasionally getting the chance to rendezvous with her fiancé Jacques. Then, in the summer of 1943, she went to Paris to work for a month in a hospital, traveling again under her false papers. She met briefly with Jacques. He was on the run for a resistance act that led to the murder of a Nazi collaborator. She begged him to stay in hiding with her.
And I told him, you cannot go back to Poitiers. You have immediately to escape and go south and go to Spain, and I will join you. But he said he has to go back. His family is in Poitiers. His brother is there. He will tell them goodbye and live with his brother and his friends as soon as they can. And he left after his examination. He left, and he promised me to write me every day. And 3 letters arrived. And the first one never came.
She soon learned that Jacques had been arrested along with his brother and several friends. He was tried and then executed for his resistance activities. Broken-hearted, Martha returned to Marseille, graduated from her nursing studies, and then moved back to Paris to work for a registry. She remained there until the Allies liberated France.
When we heard on the radio that the troops were entering Paris, all the church bells started ringing, and we opened our windows and we all sang the Marseillaise. The whole city was singing the Marseillaise.
Almost immediately after the liberation, Martha enlisted in the French army, where initially she worked as a social worker in the Alsace region of the country, close to her hometown of Metz. When her commanding officer learned that Martha spoke fluent German, he recruited her to join Army intelligence.
I was introduced to Colonel Bouvet. He told me he needs me to interrogate people, to know what's going on, to know how the strategy of the German, if they are retreating or not retreating, and how many people are there, all this military information.
After procuring information from Nazi POWs, Martha was ready for her spy mission. It involved crossing the border from Switzerland into Germany to see how entrenched the Nazis still were. She would then have to pass that intelligence on to the Allies. It took more than 13 tries, but Martha made it over the border into Germany. Her cover was that she was a German nurse trying to find out what happened to her Nazi fiancé. One day, she came upon a group of German soldiers who had retreated from the Allies.
And we were walking, and among us was a non-commissioned officer who was an SS, and he was raving about the Jews, how much he had killed Poles and Jews and all that. And he loved, and he smelled Jews a mile away. That's always what they say. He was going back to the Siegfried line. He had been wounded and he came back from the hospital. And as we walked, he fainted. So I was a good German nurse. I took care of him.
From this SS soldier, Marthe was able to obtain important information about exactly what was going on at the Nazi front lines. Making her way back to the Swiss border, she was able to transmit her report with the help of a Swiss farming family. Marthe then crossed the border again and made her way back into Germany to see if there was anything else she could uncover.
I walked to the Siegfried line to see what's going on. And when I arrived at the Siegfried line, they were all gone. The last stragglers were leaving. And they told me that the Siegfried line is empty. Do you realize what an important information that was?
The information Marthe uncovered helped to shorten the Allied effort to defeat the Nazis and saved untold numbers of lives. For the better part of a half-century, Marthe did not talk of her experiences, even with her family. But in the mid-1990s, while visiting in France, she made a request for her French Army records. When officials at the French archives saw her file of commendations and achievements, the wheels were put into motion for her to be awarded the Médaille Militaire, one of France's highest military honors, and the same medal awarded to Sir Winston Churchill by the French government. Why was she so quiet about her exploits over the years?
It was not modesty, but I thought that nobody would believe me. You know, usually a spy is a very tall, good-looking woman, and I didn't feel I was that type of person at all. I was a very unlikely spy. Thank you. Thank you. I have some comments to make about that DVD. Like usually when I'm interviewed by the media, and if people of the media are here tonight, I do not intend to offend anybody. But every time, or most of the time, I am interviewed, they never render things the way I tell them. And that has nothing to do with fake news. Thank you. Thank you. For example, there is one error in that documentary. They pretend that I was born in Alsace. To my knowledge, my home city of Metz, M-E-T-Z, is in Lorraine and not in Alsace. Alsace-Lorraine are two provinces. They are completely different provinces. The most important difference is the language. In Alsace, they speak Alsatian, which is a German dialect. In the department of the Moselle, of which Metz, my hometown, is the capital, they did not speak at the time a dialect. They spoke Hochdeutsch, the real German. In 1870, the Prussian army of Kaiser Wilhelm I invaded France and went as far as the door of Paris. They did not enter Paris like in 1940, but they laid siege to Paris, and the Parisians were starving. The French government wanted the Prussians to go back to Prussia, but the Prussians demanded that all of Alsace and the department of the Moselle in Lorraine become German, and the French government gave it to them. And between 1870 and November 11, 1918, when World War I terminated, it was forbidden. Alsace and the Department of the Moselle were annexed by the Prussian, and it was forbidden there to speak French. So when I was born in 1920, a year and a half after the end of World War I, I was number 5. My parents had no time yet to learn French. So that's why I spoke German fluently. And I had 5 years in German in the lycée, in the school where I was, in Metz. And that's why I wrote and read German as well as French, to explain you why I could do that job. I did. There is another error, much more important. My sister Stephanie was never arrested by the French police, as they said in the documentary. In my book, I wrote that she was arrested by the Gestapo. The Gestapo was a German police unit, the best known, which served the German government and the German army. And when they come to your home to arrest somebody, they don't tell you to what police unit they belong. So we thought it was the Gestapo. But years later, I did some research for Yad Vashem, the museum in Jerusalem. And I found out that my sister had been arrested by the SIPO, S-I-P-O. They're just initials of a very long German word. If you know German, you know that German like to take one word, add a word, add a word, add a word, and make a very long word. And the SIPO, S-I-P-O, are initials for security or Sicherheit in German. The SIPO was created by a decree signed by Hitler in March 1942. My sister was arrested by the SIPO on June 17, 1942, to show you how efficacious the German army was. The decree signed in March 1942, and in June 1942, they are already in position in all European countries occupied by the German army and arresting people. And they probably arrested people before that date.
They arrested your sister.
So my husband is my prompter, and he put me on track when I'm off track. So they arrested my sister and took her to their office and questioned her. She and we had saved hundreds of people. We never hit them, like the documentary said, because we were under constant surveillance. But hundreds of people rang our bell. We didn't know who they were. We didn't know from where they came, but they needed help. And the help consisted of crossing from occupied France, where Poitiers, where we were refugees, was occupied by the German army, to non-occupied France. 3/4 of France were occupied by the German army. 1/4 was under the government of Vichy. Vichy is just a town, a resort in France, where there were enough hotels to lodge all the people of the new French government. And Maréchal Pétain took over after the Germans had invaded France, and there was a very chaotic situation. So we were a democracy where all our presidents were elected. Maréchal Pétain took advantage of the chaos occurring in France to take power. And he had a government in Vichy which was collaborating 100% with the German army and the German government. After the war, Maréchal Pétain, who was a hero of the war in Verdun of World War I, was arrested and put in prison. And so he was an old man. He was never released. He died in prison because he had been a traitor to France. To give you a little idea of what was going on in France at that time. So my sister was taken to the offices and questioned, of the depot, and questioned. And she refused to give any information, because any information she would have given would have been a denunciation of Mr. Noël Degout, a farmer who had a property in Diennet, D-I-E-N-N-E, and about an hour by car from Poitiers. But at that time, the French had no more cars, we had no more gasoline, the Germans who occupied us were stealing everything we had. So Mr. Degout, his property was partially in occupied France and partially in non-occupied France. So once on his property, it was extremely easy to go from occupied France to non-occupied France. And Mr. Degout saved thousands of people. Among them were American and English pilots who had been shot down over occupied France and needed to get out as fast as possible because they didn't speak a word of French, and the German army would have noticed that and arrested them, and God knows what would have happened to them. Mr. Degout saved a lot of Jews. Mr. Degout saved all the pariahs that the Germans considered subhuman, which permitted them to treat them the way they treated them, because they were not any more humans, they were only subhumans. So
they wanted to know from your sister.
Yeah, okay. My sister refused, as I told you, to answer any questions. So the Tipo came back to our house and arrested my father to put pressure on my sister to give them the information. But even in the presence of my father, frightened that he would be kept too, she refused to give any information. My father was released the same evening because in June 1942, the Germans in Poitiers had not yet started to arrest French Jews. They had arrested only foreign Jews. As you know now, where it's a very important issue all over the world. Every time economic or political questions rise, certain political or economical question raised, the foreigners become always the first target. That was then, and it is now. So my sister was put in prison, where she stayed for a whole month, and she celebrated her 21st birthday on July 10, 1942 in prison. After that month, she was transferred to a camp on the fringes of the city of Poitiers. The camp's name was the camp of the rout of Limoges. Limoges is a city south of Poitiers. In that, you can find that camp on Google and check it if you are interested. So, in that camp, she was a medical student. She started to give medical care to the children of the foreign Jews who had been arrested. The foreign Jews were there with their entire families, even newborns. And my sister had very poor tools, but it was better than nothing. And when we, the family, decided for her to escape, we had found 2 French guardians in the camp who accepted to help her escape. She refused because she felt that what she was doing for the children was too important. In the prison, we could not visit her, but in the camp, one person of the family could go once a week. So one week I went to see her, and I reminded her that her mother needed her as much as the children. And she answered me, "Don't you realize that if I escape, you are all going to be arrested?" I had never thought about that. So on my way back from the camp to the home, I had a very long walk. I decided that all the people of my family who were still in Poitiers, we were going to escape to non-occupied France so that she can escape too. We were able to do it. And if you read my book, you will see that our escape was, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful human stories of the war. And thank you. My sister was never able to escape. And she later was transferred to Drancy, like you saw in the DVD, and in Pithiviers, 2 atrocious camps, and she was deported on September 21, 1942, to an unknown destination. In her last letter, she could not write to us because we were already in non-occupied France, and there was no postal communication between occupied and non-occupied France at that time. So she wrote to a friend in Poitiers, and she added in the postscriptum, "At the last rumors, we are leaving for Metz to work, so no need to dramatize." These are the last words she ever wrote, because years later, we found out that she had been sent to Auschwitz and she never came back. I always like to honor my sister before I tell my own story. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
But there's another subject dear to my
Yeah.
heart. Another subject dear to my heart. 75%.
Yeah, okay, yeah. There is another subject. Before I go to my own story of spying, I have another subject which is very dear to my heart and which I will talk about as briefly as possible. 75% of Jews survived in France. There is only one country occupied by the German army where more Jews would survive. That was Denmark. But in Denmark, which is a very small and flat country, they could not hide the Jews. So that the fishermen, the Danish fishermen, took them to Sweden, which was a neutral country. 95% of Jewish Danes survived because they were taken to Sweden. 5% couldn't go and they were disappeared. So, but in France it was different. We had a lot of high mountains, we had a lot of beaches, we had a lot of rural spaces, and the French people, the majority of French people, don't get me right, they were wrong. There were some people who didn't help at all. But the majority of French people helped at the risk of their life and the life of every member of their family. They saved our lives. I'm giving you an example. Several weeks before my sister was arrested, I met in the main street of Poitiers, Mr. Charpentier, with whom I had worked in the French City Hall of Poitiers, of which I was thrown out, but that's another story, by the Germans. But that's another story. You have to read my book. I cannot go into all these details. But
Mr. Charpentier.
yes, Mr. Charpentier met me in the main street of the town, Rue Gambetta, and stopped me and took me to a quiet place in the street where he told me, I am now in measure to provide you identity cards for every member of your family and for you. And I told him, Mr. Charpentier, you cannot do that. You risk your life and that of your wife and little boy. I had seen pictures of his family when we worked together. And he answered me, if I didn't help you, I could not live with myself. I asked him how much it would cost to make all these identity cards, these forged identity cards without the stamp Jew for my family. And he started crying. I was 22 years old. I had never made a man cry yet, so I was very embarrassed. And he answered me, I do not want any money. I want to save you. And he provided me with these cards. For every member of my family, we were 8 people, counting my sister, because we hoped she would need it to escape too. So that's why when I walked back from the camp after talking to her to my home, I knew we could escape because I had these cards without the stamp Jew. With the stamp Jew, you couldn't go any public space. You couldn't go to a post office. You couldn't go to a station,
Railroads.
a railroad station. You couldn't go to any public park, you couldn't go swim in the class, you couldn't go to a restaurant, you couldn't go to a hotel, you couldn't go to any public space, not even in stores. The German had decreed that we had right to go to buy food in the food stores from 4:30 to 5:30, 1 hour window. You have to remember that at that time there was no supermarket. There were only mop and pop shops. And each shop sold only 1 or 2 items. So you had to go from shop to buy all your furniture. In all these shops, so owners told us, do not worry. We know exactly what you need for your family. Come at 4:30. We will have prepared everything. You pay and you leave, and you can go to the next store. And that's how, as long as we're in Poitiers, we were never deprived of anything. And you have to understand that any help given to Jews or to the other pariah was a life sentence. And they did it anyway. And that's why I think it's very important that I remind the Americans what the French did during the war, because I know that Americans think that very little happened in France, but it's not true. How do you explain that thousands of people were deported or executed because they were in the resistance, if there was no resistance? You have to be logical, okay? That's what my mission is, to tell you that, and it's very important to me. Okay.
Go back to your story.
Now I go back to my own story. I was now, I was, so in the DVDs they told you that I joined the army right after the liberation of Paris, which isn't true. I tried to, but it was very difficult because there was a huge column. Thousands of people want to join the army. So I was in that column for several days. And when I finally reached the person to talk to, it was a woman. And she asked me immediately to see my identity card. I presented that, made by Mr. Charpentier. She looked at it and said immediately, but that's a forged card, so the army cannot accept it. Nobody else had ever said anything about the validity of that card. But she must have been an underground or resistant fighter working in forged papers to recognize immediately that it was a forged card. She asked me for my birth certificate. Paris was liberated in August 1944. But my hometown of Metz was only liberated in November 1944. So I couldn't provide my identity, my birth certificate. Third point, like everybody who wanted to join the army in France at the time of liberation, we had to prove that we had not collaborated with the German army. How do you prove something you haven't done? It's impossible. So I couldn't prove it. So I was rejected. But when Poitiers was liberated, much later than Paris, I took the first train functioning between Paris and Poitiers and went to see the mother of my fiancé you saw in the DVD. When I arrived at her house in Poitiers, she was all alone and very ill. Her two sons, her only children, had been both executed on October 6, 1943, on Mont Valérien in Paris, the worst prison in Paris at that time. And her husband, who was also a great resistant, was in the Buchenwald concentration camp in Germany. So she was all alone and very ill. I took her to Paris to live with my sister and myself. And we provided her the medical care she so badly needed. And when she was better, I took her to the cemetery where her two sons were buried, in Ivry, I-V-R-Y, a suburb of Paris, where there is a huge cemetery in Ivry. And the Germans had taken a huge section in that huge cemetery where they buried all the people they had executed. And there were no numbers and no names on these tombs. But the French manager of the cemetery, the first time I came, told me how to find the tombs. So I took the mother to the tombs one day, because that day, President de Gaulle, who was General de Gaulle too, the same man, was supposed to come to the cemetery to talk to the family of the executed. So she and I, we waited near the tombs of her two boys, and President de Gaulle arrived with a huge entourage, and he saluted and left. De Gaulle was an excellent general, but socially he was very awkward. He hated to talk to people. So but the chiefs of the army and the chiefs of the resistance, who had been the entourage of de Gaulle, stayed and talked to her. And I was standing next to her, and they asked her what they could do to help her. And she told them, Mademoiselle, which is Miss Hoffnung, that's my maiden name, was the fiancée of my oldest son, and I can absolutely recommend her. And she wants to join the French army, but has not the right documents. Can you help her? In a few days, everything was done. And I was now assigned to the 151 Regiment of Infantry in Alsace, where, if you remember, I was not born. And I was told to go to a certain place in Paris where I would find a bus to take me to the front. I went there, and I was the only woman on that bus. So others were officers, non-commissioned officers and soldiers who had come on furlough in Paris and were returning to the front. So I was the only girl and a woman and the only newcomer. He took us a little what? Excuse me. It took us a very, very long time to make it from Paris to Alsace because our bus needed repairs constantly. And on top of that, we had not enough gasoline. In the bus, I heard immediately that in Alsace, our first French army was quasi-independent strategically, but depended completely upon all resources on the 3rd and 6th American armies which were in our same sector, in Alsace. And so on the way, when we lacked gasoline, which happened several times, 2 officers on the bus went on to the American officers. So in Alsace, everybody knew that our first French army depended upon all resources on the 3rd and 6th American army. Between Paris and Alsace, the American army did not know about that agreement. So when our officers demanded gasoline, they said, for the French army, no way. So we had one option to get gasoline because they always took me along because they felt that would help. It didn't help at all. So
The only way you could get
yeah, so we had only one option to rejoin the front. The 2 officers stole the gasoline from the unattended jeeps stopped along the roads. And that's how we managed to get to the front. And when we arrived very, very late, I was the only newcomer, so I was immediately debriefed, which means interviewed by an officer of intelligence. In every army of the world, in every regiment, you have at least one officer of intelligence. And that officer asked me immediately what I had done during the resistance. I told him my work with my sister, where we saved hundreds of people, sending them to Mr. de Gou's farm, and that my sister was deported and we had not yet any news. And I told him that after that, I had tried desperately to join a resistance group. I was interviewed several times in Marseille and in Paris by resistance chiefs in the attics of very high buildings in both cities, because that was ultra secret. And both times, these chiefs looked at me. You have all seen that I am very short, and that's an understatement. But I was at that time 4'11", very thin, very blonde, with blue eyes and a light skin. And they decided, one after the other, without discussing it, they decided that I had absolutely no substance. They took me for a bimbo, and they refused me. And the captain said to me, that's a lot of hogwash. You should have gone in the street and killed a German. And I answered him, I am a nurse. I take care of people. I do not kill anybody, not even the Germans I hate. And he said, you see, you are not fit to be in the army. And he too wanted to send me back to my mother. I told him, I know. I had enough trouble coming here. The headquarters in Paris sent me. I am going to stay. So furious by my attitude, he told me, as a registered nurse, you should be an officer. But because you
were such a coward.
You were such a coward during the resistance, I make you sergeant. And I just shrugged my shoulders because I couldn't care less what grade I was getting. Then, more furious by my attitude, he said, I do not need any nurses. I have enough nurses. You are going to be a social worker. All my training had been in nursing. I had not the slightest concept what it entailed to be a social worker. But in the army, and that counts for all armies in the world, if they tell you you're a social worker, that's what you are. So I went to the town because after that, because all the troops which were not at the front had a room in the town of Alsace. And I slept all night, and the next morning I got up and put on the American uniform I was given. I told you, all our resources came from the American Army, the 3rd and 6th American armies. So that uniform was much too big for me, but it was warm. And that was very important because the winter of 1944-1945 was unusually cold. So after putting on that atrocious uniform, I wondered what I was going to do because nobody gave me any orders, any indication of what they expected from me as a social worker. So I decided to visit our troops at the front. I inquired and I left the town in a certain direction, crossed a little forest, and on the other side was a canal. There are lots of canals in Alsace. And our troops were on the western edge of the canal. The Germans had retreated 2 or 3 days earlier on the eastern side of the canal, which was narrow like most man-made canals. And I entered the foxholes of our troop. They were very surprised because they had never seen a social worker in their foxholes. And I asked them what they wanted. They requested underwear, hats, scarves, socks, blankets, food, and reading and writing material. I would go back to the town, and the Alsatians were extremely generous and gave me a lot of things for our troop. I did that for 3 weeks. And one day, crossing the square of the town, I met at the colonel of the regiment. In 1943, we all had heard that a resistant had killed the first German, an officer, on the metro station Barbès-Rochechouart in Paris. And that resistant was able to escape. When I joined the army, that regiment, I heard very fast that the colonel of the regiment was the resistant who had killed the first German on the metro station Barbès-Rochechouart. It was Pierre Fabien, and
There is now a station
What?
There's now a station in Paris.
Yes, there is now a station in Paris, a metro station bearing the name of Pierre Fabien. So Pierre Fabien stopped me and asked me to answer his phone during his lunch break. I went with him to his office. He showed me around, and leaving, he was very good looking, which doesn't hurt anything. And he was very courteous, and he told me, I am sorry, I have nothing to read for you. There are only German books in that home. And I told him, that's quite all right. I read German fluently. So extremely interested, he walked back towards me and asked me if I spoke German. And I told him, yes, I speak German as well as French. Then he explained to me that in the German army, all the males were called in the army, were in uniform in the army. So any man in civilian clothes walking the streets of Germany would be immediately noticed and arrested. That's why they needed women. And he asked me if I accepted to be transferred to the intelligence service of the First French Army. I accepted. He left. I sat on a chair and wondered in what predicament I had put myself, but it was too late. 2-3 days later, 2 officers picked me up and took me to Mulhouse, another city in Alsace, and later in Colmar, another city in Alsace, where I underwent a very intensive training for what I had to do. When my training was terminated, I was asked to create my own alibi, because that would stick much better than an alibi given to me. I created my alibi, presented it, and it was accepted. After that, I was assigned to the Commandos of Africa, a regiment of the First French Army. That whole First French Army, who was de Gaulle's army, came from North Africa. So Colonel Bouvet, of which you heard the name pronounced in the DVD, commanded the Commandos of Africa. The first thing he asked me to do was to interrogate German prisoners of war, to learn the plan of retreat of the Germans from Alsace to Germany. In winter of 1944, the Germans had counterattacked in Belgium, and that counterattack was so powerful that they almost won the war. But luckily, the Allied armies were able to stop that counterattack just before Christmas 1944. Now, in January 1945, the Germans were counterattacking again, but this time they came through Strasbourg, and all the Allied armies which were in the east of France had to retreat quite west for several weeks. I was among them. For several weeks we retreated west until that counterattack was terminated by the Allied armies. But Colonel Bouvet asked me for that plan of attack, to give you an idea how the Germans were defending themselves. Because that was the last chance to prevent the Allied armies to invade Germany. So I interrogated colonels and generals because the subaltern wouldn't have known anything about the plan of retreat. And I was able to get some information. And in a medal that you will see later in another little room, there is a medal of which the citation says that I provided Colonel Bouvet with extremely precise and important information on the plan of retreat of the Germans from Alsace to Germany. That was my first achievement in the army. After that, Colonel Bouvet asked me to cross the front in Alsace, not yet Germany, the front in Alsace. And 13 times I tried to cross the front in Alsace, and I was not successful. There were many reasons for that. One of the reasons, during the war, things change extremely fast. Everything is very fluid. And I was told to go from A to B, where I would find precise things. But when I arrived in B, I couldn't find the precise things, so I couldn't proceed. That was one of the reasons. There are other reasons. We had military guides who explains exactly how to go from A to B and what you will find on the ground and how to proceed on the ground. But they are humans and they make mistakes. I will give you an example. One night, very late, I was always taken very late at night. I was taken in a jeep by 2 officers to a certain point in Alsace. They stopped the jeep around midnight near a huge field covered with snow. We got out of the jeep and they explained to me that I had to go northwest on that field where in a small town I will find a group of German soldiers ready to retreat, but still in Alsace, not yet in Germany, to mix with them, go with them, and send back as much information I had. I had only a little suitcase with my clothes, of which I had taken all the labels off so nobody could tell they came from France. But I had no compass, I had no arm, I had no map, I had nothing in writing. Everything I needed to know was in my memory. And
didn't even have a flashlight.
I didn't even have a flashlight. So I left and I started crossing that huge field. It was a very, very dark and cold night of February 1945. And as I walked, hoping that it was northwest, I had no compass, but I hoped I was going northwest. And as I walked, suddenly I heard a huge crack, and I felt myself submerged in the ice-cold water of a canal. The military guide had forgotten to tell me there was a canal in the field. So as I popped up and I tried to grasp the edges of the canal to get out of that ice-cold water, by that ice-cold night. You must understand that I could not call for help. I had to do it on my own. So as I grasped, everything was so frozen that I couldn't grasp sufficiently to get out of the canal, because now I was much heavier. I was drenched in that ice-cold water from head to toe. So it took me a very long time, but I finally found a place where I was able to grasp sufficiently to get out of the canal. If not, I wouldn't be here tonight. And I walked all night, by that cold night, and I never even caught a cold. And at daybreak, I noticed that the print of my shoes showed that I had walked in circle all night. And years later, I read a magazine in which I found that if people have no compass and no other way to mark that they walk, they will walk by a very dark night. They will walk in circle, which explained why I had done that very weird thing. After that, the captain who directed our small group of intelligence decided that I would cross into Germany from Switzerland. Now, Switzerland was neutral, but the Swiss had helped the Germans as long as the Germans were successful. Now we were successful, they were helping us. That's neutrality. So I was taken by one of our officers to Basel, a city in Alsace.
In Switzerland.
In Switzerland, I'm sorry. In Basel, a city in Switzerland. And we met there. I had met him before, Colonel Reinhardt, who was the director of the intelligence service of the Swiss customs in Basel. Colonel Reinhardt immediately accepted that I cross from Germany into Switzerland. From Switzerland into Germany. So he called an agent, Mr. Le Maire. Both names, Reinhardt and Le Maire, are fictitious. So he called Mr. Le Maire to ask him to take me to the Swiss border with Germany. Mr. Le Maire took me by car to Schaffhausen, another city in Switzerland, but very close to Germany, to the city of Singen, S-I-N-G-E-N, the first German city where I was supposed to go. So he stopped the car near Schaffhausen in an enclave. The enclave, that means the Swiss territory just into Germany. And he stopped the car near a small forest. We crossed by foot, and on the other side of the small forest, there was a huge field bordered on the northern edge by a small country road. The forest and the field were Switzerland, but the little country road was Germany. And along the Swiss of that field, there was no barrier whatsoever. You could cross from the field onto the road without any barrier. But the road was under the surveillance of two German military sentinels, heavily armed, which came from the eastern edge of the width of the field, walked to the center of the width of the field. The other sentinel came from the west, joined him. They talked 2-3 seconds, turned their back, and walked until the edge of the field. And they were doing that constantly, without stopping, night and day. So Mr. Le Maire told me, towards evening, when it's still light, when I tell you, you will crawl in the field and hide behind the bushes near the road. When the two soldiers had turned their back to you and walked to the edges of the field. And when they come back and separate again and turn their back to you, you walk on the road, walk towards the east, towards the right, towards Germany. Very well. Mr. Le Maire and I, we stayed in that forest all afternoon, and he talked to me about his wife and children. He was a middle-aged man. I was 24 years old, but in the afternoon, with a very strange smile, he said to me, "You may be killed tonight, so why don't we have a good time now?" But that was not on my agenda. So after that, we talked about other things, and
He said, now is
at a certain time, Mr. Le Maire said to me, "Now is the time." I took my little suitcase. Like before, I had taken all the labels off of my clothes. I had no compass, no arm, no map, nothing in writing. Everything was in my memory. Everything I needed was in my memory. But this time I had two new things. The day before I left, I was given vouchers for Germany, because in Germany everything was on vouchers. But nobody in my intelligence service could tell me how to proceed with the vouchers. You cannot just go to an office and give a voucher. You have to know how to proceed with it. But nobody could tell me. And they gave me a lot of money to buy whatever I needed in Germany. Buses, trains, restaurants, hotels, food, whatever I needed money. So I had these two new things in my suitcase. And once when Mr. Le Maire told me now is the time, I crawled and hid behind the bushes. Until then, everything was perfect. But once behind the bushes, I became so frightened that at the thought that I did not know how to proceed with the vouchers. And I remembered too that I had forgotten to ask, and my handlers had forgotten to tell me the name of the clinic where I was supposed to work in Constance for a doctor. So all these things, once lying down near behind the bushes, seeing the Germans come and go, I became so terrified that I was paralyzed by fear. And it took me a very, very long time to overcome that fear. But suddenly, something blinked in my brain. I remembered something which made me get up, take my little suitcase and walk on the road towards the sentinel who was coming back from the eastern edge of the field. I raised my right arm, Heil Hitler, and he asked for my identity card. I presented it. That was now a card forged by my intelligence service, and my name was now Marthe Ulrich. And I told you before, I had an entire alibi. So he looked at my card, and I wondered if he too would realize that it's a forged card. But he gave it back to me without questioning. I was now in Germany. I have something very important to ask you. Are you willing to listen about 15 more minutes that I finish my story? Thank you. Okay.
You were in Freiburg.
Yeah.
Singen first.
I was first in Singen and then later in Freiburg. And in Freiburg, I had been told by my intelligence service, because we had so little information, to watch what was going on. So I was watching, and I discovered that in daytime there was absolutely no transportation, no buses, no trains, no military cars functioned in daytime because of the Allied bombardments. But everything functioned at night. So in daytime, if the Germans wanted to walk, to go somewhere, they had to walk. And they always walked in groups because they are not very individualistic and don't like to be alone. So I joined one group which was going in my direction, in the direction I wanted to go. And in that group, as you saw in the DVD, there was an SS who came back from the Eastern Front. He immediately told us that he had been wounded on the Eastern Front, and he came back from the hospital and was now assigned to the Siegfried line, of which an entrance was on the way we were going. And he told us during the walk, he constantly told us about the atrocities they had committed on the Eastern Front. That was the first time I heard that, because the American and English government had kept us completely in the dark. All the people in occupied Europe were kept in complete dark. We knew only from Russia where the front was day by day, but that's all we knew. Now I heard, and in Western Europe, the Germans had committed atrocities too, but nothing compared to what was going on the Eastern Front. So I was walking just next to that office, to that
soldier.
No, non-commissioned officers at the SS. And he said at one point, I smell a Jew a mile away. But that morning his smell was pretty bad. So, and as we walked at a good pace, and it was a little warm, he suddenly fainted. I was a nurse, a German nurse. I took care of him. And when he regained consciousness, he became so grateful of what I had done for him that he invited me to come to visit him at the Siegfried line, and he gave me his phone number. But for 3 weeks, I had other things to do. 3 weeks later, I came back to Freiburg, and I heard on the German radio that the Allied armies were very close and were going to invade Freiburg. I decided to go immediately to the Siegfried line to see what was going on there. So I walked to the Siegfried line all alone. And that was 10 kilometers. I walked an enormous amount in Germany. And when I arrived at the Siegfried line, I discovered that the Siegfried line had been completely evacuated that morning. And the last stragglers were leaving, and they told me, they are all gone. We are the last one to leave. In intelligence, you have to have 3 confirmation of a fact to accept it. So I asked several stragglers who walked independently, and they all confirmed that that was the truth. So knowing that it was the truth, I immediately understood the importance of that finding. That meant that if our Allies' army had not to fight the Siegfried line, which was an atrocious project, they would much faster, they could much faster occupy the south of Germany and terminate the war. So I walked back to Freiburg as fast as I could. And Freiburg, the inhabitants of Freiburg were all running to their homes because they all knew that the foreign army was going to invade them. And it's very frightening. I was in Poitiers when the German army invaded it, and I can tell you it's awfully frightening. So I was all alone in the center of Freiburg. I went to the main artery, to the main boulevard, and waited. And the first tank arrived and rode towards me. How was I going to tell the people on that tank that I was a friend and not an enemy? I had no document, none, to prove who I was. So I went in the middle of the street and raised, I cannot do that anymore, raised my arm as high as I could. And I made the V sign for victory of Winston Churchill. Because I knew that everybody at the time knew too that Winston Churchill was very seldom photographed without making the sign, the V sign for victory with his 2 fingers. And as I am extremely lucky, the tank did not kill me, but stopped. And I asked for the officer in charge to come down and talk to me. And I was very lucky he did. But I must say I was quite assertive too. So he came down, and
French.
And another lucky thing for me, it was the French army which invaded Freiburg. You can all Google it and check that I tell you the truth. And it was so lucky, because if an English-speaking army had invaded Freiburg, I don't know how I could have communicated with them, because I didn't speak English yet. So the French officer who talked to me accepted to take me to headquarters, and arrived at headquarters where I met Commander Petit of the 2nd Zouave, another regiment from North Africa, who immediately told me, who tells me that the truth, it may be a trap. So I took a paper and a pen and I wrote a phone number on that paper of the intelligence service to which I belonged, because we had the same technology as the American Army. We could call any service in the field. So he called my service, which reassured him that he could trust me, and they were happy to know that I was still alive, because I had no radio, if you remember, so I couldn't communicate very often with them. And Commander Petit sent a patrol to the Siegfried Line, which came back much later and said, that's true, the Siegfried Line is completely evacuated. I was a very important VIP at the French headquarters that night. I was invited for dinner, I was given a room, and the next morning at breakfast, Commander Petit asked me if I wanted to go back to my service of intelligence. I told him no, my mission ends the day of the armistice. I have this morning to cross again the front south of Freiburg and go to the south of Germany, which is not yet occupied. But I asked Commander Petit for a huge, huge service. I asked him for a bicycle because I was tired of walking. So he gave me a bicycle. And with a bicycle, riding down from a huge summit, I saw stopped along the road a group of German military
Ambulances.
what?
Ambulance.
Yeah.
Ambulance.
Yeah, military ambulances. And the colonel, who was a physician too, I recognized that by his uniform immediately, was with his whole entourage stopped along the ambulances. I stopped immediately, because if you are in intelligence and you see something unusual, you inquire what's going on. And I started talking to the colonel, who told me that that night they would cross into Switzerland and from there into Austria to become
Prisoners.
Military.
Prisoners of war. Prisoners of war.
Yeah, prisoners of war, I'm sorry. And he asked me from where I was coming, and I told him that that morning I had escaped from Freiburg because I was terrorized by the by the French army, which had Moroccan, Algerian, Tunisian, and black soldiers, which was absolutely true. The French army had all that personnel. But if you remember and realize how racist the Germans were at that time, you can realize too how much effect what I was telling the colonel had on him and all his entourage. I was now for them a model of a German patriot. And I was complaining too that our German army was not defending us anymore as much as they should. And after a while, the colonel said to me, "Don't be so pessimistic. The war is not ended. And he told me exactly where the remnant of the German army was hidden in ambush in the Black Forest, waiting for the Allied armies. And that information I was able to get to my service by entering Switzerland myself at daybreak through under the barbed wires and giving my letter to the Swiss custom man, because Colonel Reinhardt in Basel had told me before I left, if ever you are in trouble, go in Switzerland, find a custom man, they're all over and very reliable, but tell him you are a Swiss agent, not French. So that's what I did. And I gave my letter with all the information. I had not taken the time to code it, because that takes hours. And I had it written in French, and it was in my left pocket with my hand on top of it to protect it, big protection. And I gave it to that customer who sent it to Colonel Reinhardt, like I told him, who received it that same morning. And he read it, I knew later, because he wanted to know what was going on. And then he gave it to my service. And that's why I got all these medals you will see later. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You are a very good audience. You're very patient to stay so late.
It's easy, Marthe. What a privilege to learn from you, from your wisdom, from your determination, from your courage, from your wit. On behalf of Chabad and all of our co-sponsors, we'd like to thank you for joining us tonight and sharing of your life and of your joy. We are so delighted that we had such a great turnout from the community and from the university. Marthe and Major, getting to know you over the last few days has been a joy, and hearing your story tonight has inspired me, and I'm sure many in our audience, to do more. You defied hate and hardship and suffered only because you were a Jew. Yet you responded with bravery and unwavering commitment. We live in more fortunate times, and we can seize our opportunities, maximize our potential with a similar commitment to our Jewish life and our values. We can recognize a need and act, spreading goodness in the world wherever we can. Marthe and Major, thank you for coming to Cleveland to share your story. In appreciation for your tireless effort, work, and travel, we would like to present you with this handcrafted dual candlestick celebrating Chai. We hope its flames will remind you of the warmth and gratitude of our Cleveland audience on this day, Chai Elul, the 18th of Elul. Dr. Cohn will be showing many of his wife's medals next door, where you can also purchase signed copies of Marthe's thrilling book. And Marthe will be available to greet everyone graciously and answer any of your questions. Please join me again in thanking Martin Major for visiting us on this unforgettable evening.